All right, so the United Nations was formed in October of 1945. This was a response to World War II. It was also a response to the failure of the League of Nations. As you probably remember from our World War I unit, Woodrow Wilson had 14 points, and his favorite of those was the establishment of a League of Nations. And the purpose of it was to prevent another world war and to resolve disputes between nations and keep the peace. Despite his best efforts, traveling the country, pushing the United States into membership of the League of Nations, the United States actually voted against joining the League of Nations. And so it went into existence, but without its, founding member. The whole thing was Woodrow Wilson's idea. And so the League of Nations disbanded after it failed to prevent Japan from invading Manchuria, and then it failed in preventing the Second World War as well. All right, so there are 6 parts of the United Nations, and we'll go through each of these. The first one is a General Assembly. This one is like a legislative body where each member has 1 vote, and they make decisions based on a 2/3 majority of people who are present and who are voting. But they just make decisions about all sorts of issues having to do with keeping the peace, keeping security, admitting new members, and budget decisions. Okay, so the Security Council, this is kind of like the executive body. Their job is to act on the issues that are debated by the General Assembly. They have 5 permanent members, and they are mainly the 5 most powerful allies in World War II. So it's the United States, France, Great Britain, Russia, and China. And then in addition to those 5 permanent members, there are 10 rotating members representing different countries, and they rotate on and off. All right, then there is the Secretariat. This is the administrative body of the United Nations, and their leader is called the Secretary General. And typically the Secretary General comes from a small neutral nation so that they cannot be influenced by a large, powerful nation. They don't want the Secretary General making decisions on the basis of what their personal country wants. And so this position is very important, and it is decided upon by the 5 permanent member nations of the Security Council. All 5 have to approve the Secretary General, who that person is going to be. And this is an important body, and as a result, the people who are a part of this body have to take an oath pledging their loyalty to the United Nations. All right, and then there's an International Court of Justice, which does exactly what it sounds like. It settles disputes between countries. This court does not have the power to send the military out to enforce its decisions. The Security Council can do that or make recommendations to do that. But the good news is that most of the countries obey the International Court of Justice's decisions without having to have any type of military or anything like that. The 5th part is the Economic and Social Council, and they advise on issues that have to deal with the economy or society or humanitarian efforts or cultural activities. Most recently in the 2000s, their focus has been on promoting clean energy and making sure that employees in poor countries are receiving fair wages for their labor. And then lastly, the Trustee Council. This is actually not in operation anymore, but it was originally set up to oversee territories' governments until they reached independence. Well, the thing is, their last territory that they were overseeing became independent in 1994, and so since then they have not been in operation. Although some people have said that the Trusteeship Council should advise on matters regarding the sea and outer space. So that's kind of interesting. All right, So we've talked about this before, but the United Nations has adopted the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. They did so in 1948. And one of the main goals of the United Nations is to make sure that countries are respecting human rights worldwide. And so they want to make sure that citizens of these different member nations are not being enslaved or tortured, that they are receiving equality under the law. They have, like our First Amendment rights, the freedom to, like freedom of speech, freedom to practice whatever religion you want to express your opinion. They want equal pay for equal work, and so it's gender equality kind of put in that one. Making sure that children are looked after and that people have access to food and clothing and clean water and healthcare and education. All right, so another major task of the UN is keeping the peace. And so ideally, they would like to keep the peace through diplomacy, that is through politics or treaties or agreements, rather than having to send out a military. When necessary, they do send peacekeeping forces. Peacekeeping forces are necessary in some places, like in areas where, like in the former Yugoslavia, once they disbanded as a result of the fall of the USSR, there were peacekeeping missions sent to the former Yugoslavia to make sure that war didn't break out. You know what happened in the former Yugoslavia, and so that was not all that successful. In some cases it was, but I mean, that was a pretty dangerous place to be in the 90s. One of the problems with the peacekeeping missions is that by the time the UN makes the decision to send out a peacekeeping mission, and then these soldiers from various countries actually get there, war has already broken out. So they respond too slowly to conflict, and as a result, the peacekeeping missions are not successful or not as successful. All right, so other tasks of the UN, and a lot of these we've mentioned before, but one, they want to protect refugees, that is people who are forced to flee their country either because of natural disaster or war or famine. And so they work through other non-government organizations, NGOs, to help provide food and medicine and temporary shelter for refugees. They also want to eliminate hunger. And so since 1961, the UN has fed more than 1.4 billion people. Most of them, the reason why they didn't have access to food was either because of political unrest or because of natural disasters. The UN has also created UNESCO, which stands for United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization. They originally were formed to help rebuild schools and museums and libraries after World War II because the war destroyed many of those things. But after they repaired that war damage, they focused on promoting reading and writing and free education and the protection of cultural and environmental sites. The UN has also created the WHO, that is the World Health Organization, and the goal of WHO is to improve human health, mostly by sending out information about epidemics. There's a picture in the book on page 701 of Red Cross volunteers traveling around Guinea, going door to door with information about Ebola. So just providing information to help control epidemic, providing vaccines for preventable diseases and things like that. And the UN has also created 17 global goals that they hope to reach by the year 2030. We've talked about this in a previous unit as well, but some of these goals are: one, they want to end hunger, they want to end poverty, they would like to have gender equality, they want to guarantee clean water, sanitation for all people, They want to help fight climate change and environmental damage by pushing clean energy. So focusing on renewable energy sources like solar power, wind power, hydroelectric power, instead of the burning of fossil fuels like coal and gasoline and natural gas. All right, so financial non-government organizations, or NGOs. So the World Bank was created in 1944 with the purpose of fighting poverty and loaning money to countries. And so the World Bank is actually more hands-on than the organization we're getting ready to talk about, the IMF. But the World Bank actually loans money to countries for specific projects. So if there's a country who decides that it would be beneficial for them to build a highway from the eastern part of their country to the western part of the country, then they can apply for a loan from the World Bank, and the World Bank will give them money for specific projects. The UN estimates that about half of these projects have actually failed, either because they weren't executed properly, or the project cost more money than what they thought, or because whoever was in charge actually just took the money and ran off with it. And then people have actually criticized the World Bank because they don't first make sure that the project won't cause environmental damage. So a highway might be great, might provide economic growth, but it might cut through a habitat of animals that is about to go extinct or something like that. And then the International Monetary Fund, this one was created in 1945, and this one is more of looks toward the longer range goals of a country. They aren't as hands-on in that they don't really provide loans like the World Bank does, but this is more overarching. Like before the euro, think about the currency in a country like Greece versus the currency in a country like Great Britain. The currency in Great Britain is going to be a whole lot more stable and worth a whole lot more than the currency in Greece. And so the International Monetary Fund will step in to try to stabilize currency exchange rates so that countries like Greece can do business with countries like Great Britain. They also can provide economic advice to countries. They'll actually send economists to various countries to make sure that they are making the best economic decisions for their countries. All right, that is all. I hope you have an awesome day, and don't forget to send me a picture of your notes.